Well, I think ultimately what you're going to see here is that when an agreement is reached on these are logistics behind when the release is going to happen, then I think you'll see those bombardments stop. And I think some of that activity has already decreased somewhat. So there's a framework here, and the framework is simple. Once you agree on the logistics of how this is going to happen, I think the Israelis and everyone acknowledge you can't release hostages in the middle of strikes. So the strikes will have to stop. And as you saw the president state that very clearly on Friday, where he asked the Israelis to begin to pull back to create the conditions for these releases.
So this is not a violation of that.
There's going to be a lot of complexities. Well, we're trying to get the hostages out. That's the bottom line. We want to get the hostages out as soon as possible. For that to happen, there can't be a war going on in the middle of it, and Hamas has to agree to turn them over, and we have to have the right people go in and get them. That's what we're going to focus on right now, and that's what we've been focused on, and that's what the talks are going to be about today, on Monday, on Tuesday, to get this done as soon as possible.
I hear you. There are two phases here. With the Hamas releasing the hostages is the one you're most focused on, but big picture, does the United States assess that Israel has so reduced the threat posed by Hamas that it can end combat and transition to the kind of lower tempo counterterrorism campaign that, say, the United States carries out against terrorist threats to this country?
Well, look, I mean, the ideal outcome here is you don't have to carry out any counter-terror missions because there are no terrorists in Gaza.
But can they take the win? Can Netanyahu say he won this war?
Well, first of all, creating a Gaza or setting up a Gaza that is governed by Palestinian technocrats that are not terrorists and are not sponsoring terrorism, that's not going to happen in 72 hours. That's going to take some time to build up, and it's going to require a lot of work and a lot of international support. And that's the end goal here of this entire endeavor. After you get the hostages out. By the way, if you can't get the hostages out, you have no hope of getting that done. So that's why I say, that these two steps need to happen. But it's going to take a lot of hard work and time. You're trying to build something that doesn't exist right now, which is a sort of civilian Palestinian leadership that's not tied to terrorism. That doesn't exist right now. It's going to take a lot of help from international partners. That's why having the countries in the region and the Europeans and all others involved in this, in both money and resources, that's why building that coalition is so critical, and then implementing it is not going to be easy. It's going to take some time here. But I think certainly for the first time in a long time, you see the framework and the outlines of something that could work.
But combat operations can end.
Well, that's the goal here. Well, you wouldn't need combat operations if there weren't terrorists there. But by the same token, I would remind everybody, if in fact at the end of all this, terrorism and a terrorist group remains active inside of Gaza, you're not going to have peace. That's the fundamental truth here that everyone needs to accept. You're never going to have peace in Gaza as long as there are terrorists operating from that territory threatening the security of Israel.
But in terms of occupation and combat operations, that's different than a counterterrorism campaign. But